You're listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and today I am joined by Vanessa Sadler. Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. It's great to be here.
Say a little bit about who you are, what you spend your time doing.
I'm located on the traditional land of the Yuchi, Shawnee, and Cherokee and Choctaw tribes, which is Middle Tennessee. So I'm just outside of Nashville. My husband and I have two incredible kiddos and one amazing teenager. Professionally, I'm a trauma-informed spiritual director and a story work facilitator with the Allender Center. So I see people one-on-one. I also work for an organization called the Center for Formation, Justice, and Peace. And I primarily have two roles there. One, I host a podcast where I get to chat with authors and activists who are at this intersection of spiritual formation and racial and social justice, and sort of what does it mean to be spiritually malformed, if you will, especially when it comes to issues of justice. And then two, I facilitate spiritual respite and retreats for those who are working and laboring in the world of racial and social justice. So all of that to say, I'm passionate about a great many things, but most of all, I just care really deeply about curating spaces for people to connect with God, with themselves, and with one another.
So let's talk a little bit. I mean, you have a lot of hats. You wear a lot of hats. You've got your fingers in a lot of different pots, but one of those pots is story work. I'm curious how you got involved in story work personally.
I remember reading The Wounded Heart pretty early on in my personal therapeutic journey, but it wasn't until several years later that I actually participated in an in-person Wounded Heart story group. It was just 3 women and a facilitator, and I had the experience of writing 2 to 3 stories and engaging them with the facilitator and the group. And I became really interested in the methodology itself. I just knew that there were elements and layers of my own story that were being named in this really profound and robust way, more than any therapeutic setting that I'd been in. So I asked the group facilitator where she'd been trained, and she pointed me toward the Allender Center training programs. So I showed up with no prior exposure to story work, to a story workshop, just that one group, and I've been hooked ever since.
Okay, so you read the book The Wounded Heart by Dan Allender, and you're in a group, a therapeutic group, and you write a couple stories about your experience of harm growing up, and you read them. Yes?
Yes.
What was it like for you to have those stories initially engaged?
It was very vulnerable. I think initially I felt very exposed to bring something that was very cherished, and even something that I would say I was still trying to kind of work out in myself, to a group and leave it open for them to comment and have feedback on, is just very vulnerable.
Super vulnerable. And as you start engaging these stories in more depth and just your own story more broadly, what were some of the obstacles that got in the way of you going deeper in your story?
Practically, I think time and finances were an obstacle initially. And so to think about investing time and money and energy into myself and my story, I think it felt really indulgent and kind of selfish, if I'm honest. But at the same time, like, my story was pursuing me. I was being pursued by my story in my everyday life. And I think personally, one of the obstacles for engaging story work for me was accepting that there would be no arriving, quote unquote, at a state of completion or some sort of like combination lock that would suddenly click open when pieces of my story started to become clear. I can very much be like a task-oriented checklist sort of person, and leaning into the sort of cyclical nature of engaging story, where one layer opens up grief and healing, which leads to more curiosity, that leads to more grief and to more healing, and so on. Leaning into that cycle was challenging and disruptive at first, when I wanted so much to come to like a fixed state of healing. And I would say that probably my own spiritual upbringing and the church even kind of teaches that as well. Just that we arrive at this place and it's very linear, where in reality, it's actually very cyclical and you just go deeper and deeper each time.
You said a fascinating phrase a minute ago. You said that your story was pursuing you.
Hmm.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it was showing up. I think, the language today that people often use is trigger, right? So I was being triggered. I think we use that word so much today that even that has become kind of rote and lost a little bit of its meaning. My younger parts were showing up. My younger parts were showing up, and I didn't have language and I didn't recognize them as such. In parenting or in my marriage, even when I would just be alone with my thoughts, my stories were appearing. They were showing up. They weren't coming to me in like flashes of memory, but they were sort of like oozing out of me in my behaviors and in my anger, or like being really fixed to that task list. And if something changed in my regular schedule or my day, it would be so disruptive. I would feel so disoriented. I didn't know how to like come back to myself.
So, what I'm hearing you say is you had symptoms.
Yes.
There was debris from your stories that was manifesting as symptoms in your adult life as a mother, as a wife, in your work. And you were noticing something's not right.
Yes. I think it's important to say that at the time that I started engaging story work, I had come through probably 4 or 5 years of pretty intense therapeutic work with some acute things that were going on in my marriage. And so that was very present oriented. And once that sort of came to a place of equilibrium, then it was like, oh, now the actual deeper work can actually be mined.
Yeah, that's a really important framework to understand because I think it's common. Oftentimes, present day crises bring us into some degree of therapeutic work, whether it's in our marriage, whatever it is. And then in the process of engaging that present day stuff, we begin, some of us, to explore the linkages between all of the symptoms in the present and our past stories in our family of origin. And that's really the core of story work. That's, in my opinion, the genius of Dan Allender's methodology is that there is a linkage between your present life and your past stories in your family. And what I'm hearing you say is that you began exploring those linkages in much more depth when you dove into story work.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you have courageously and vulnerably agreed to read one of your stories. It's a story about you as an 11-year-old girl, and I'm wondering if now would be a good time to read that.
Now would be a great time. The first time I shaved my legs, I was 11 years old. I felt like I was late to the party compared to the other girls in my sixth grade class, something I just become used to now that I was growing up in the younger group of kids. The cutoff date for registration was later in Colorado, so I was usually in the older group back home. But in Kentucky, with the cutoff date a whole month later, I was now at the younger end. I didn't mind though. As an only child raised by a single parent, I was used to being around grown-ups, used to being the youngest in the room, used to doing things on my own, and used to learning by observation. Mom hadn't given me the okay to shave my legs yet. She hadn't exactly told me no either. Like most things I asked her about, there wasn't much discussion. I imagine she said something like, "Let's wait until later," or "Not right now, honey." It was her way of saying, "I don't have the energy for that." But I knew I was ready, so I figured it out by myself. I listened to the other girls when they talked about it in class, what products they use, what tips they recommended to each other. I wasn't actually part of the conversation. I sort of just orbited around different groups of kids at my school. I paid closer attention to the shaving gel and razor commercials that came on in between shows in the afternoons or between the Denver Broncos game on Sundays. Funny, I noticed that men shave their face in the direction the hair grows, and women shave their legs in the opposite direction the hair grows. I made all of the mental notes I felt necessary until I had built up enough confidence to give it a try. Tonight was the night. I borrowed one of Mom's simple blue Gillette razors, just 2 blades and a white moisture strip. I borrowed her shaving cream too, original with the red cap. Inside the shower, I propped my foot on the ledge in the back corner and popped the top off the shaving cream after shaking the bottle. I pressed the ribbed top of the can, and white foam formed a puffy cloud in my palm. I can still hear the sound. A clean, fresh aroma with a hint of menthol mingled with the steam in the shower, lifting to my nostrils as I began to cover my left shin and calf up to the knee. I rubbed a thin layer, enough to cover the dark brown hair on my legs, but not so much that the hair disappeared. Then I poised the blade, took a deep breath, and made a slow, controlled swipe from the ankle upward on the outside of my shin, leaving a clean trail behind the razor. I'm not sure what I expected to happen. Am I doing this right? I thought. I made another swipe beside the first one, overlapping the previous area just a bit. I continued, pressing down on the razor slightly, gaining confidence as I went. When I finished swiping the remaining cream around my lower leg, I ran my hand upward to feel the smoothness. Wow, that's crazy. I repeated the steps on the opposite leg. After I dried off, I tipped my head over, positioning the light blue terry cloth towel on the back of my neck, twisting the front several times before tossing it over the top of my head and bobbing it side to side to relish the feeling of the ends of the towel as it brushed along my shoulders. Is this what the other girl's hair feels like when it cascades over the top of their shoulders? I wondered. Wiping the fog glass, I looked at the reflection staring back at me. Instead of blue-green eyes, I have brown. Short, dark brown curls are hidden under my towel, curls my mom doesn't know what to do with. Chestnut brown skin takes up most of the mirror. Without faces that look like mine, I do not know how to fit in. One thing I do know, I will have smooth legs like the other girls.
Vanessa, thank you. What's happening for you emotionally?
Emotionally, I feel really near to her right now. I'm remembering sensations. I'm remembering taking a shower this morning, having shaved my legs. I'm thinking of my daughter who's, nearing this age. I have a lot of tenderness present right now, actually.
My first sense when I read this story was of the innocence of this 11-year-old girl who's trying to do a grown-up thing, who wants, who's like paying attention for weeks to commercials, to conversation at school. Like you're gathering data so that you can learn how to do this thing.
Yeah.
But it's not merely the innocence, it's also the initiative, because at some level, you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing quite yet. You haven't gotten mom's permission.
Right. That was pretty normal, I think, for me. I'm 11 years old, but I think maybe you've had the sensation too that as you write a story, you feel a little bit older. I felt a little bit older than I actually was at 11 years old. And so even that feeling of like being late to the party, I felt like this was something that should have already been done. And I'm having to teach myself.
Yeah. Which there's a sentence in the opening paragraph where you say that you're used to doing things on my own and used to learning by observation.
Yeah. One of the running questions that my mom asks me to this day, sort of, she asks it tongue in cheek, is just, Nessa, how do you know so much? How do you know how to do so much? And I taught myself how to do most things.
And your mom's a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have siblings?
No, so I'm an only child, latchkey kid. came home after school, was alone for a couple of hours until I hit high school and started playing sports, but it was just me and her. And what I remember about our apartment, we were in an apartment, not a house. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, but my sort of space was the living room. And when she got home, her space was at her room in the back of the house. And that's sort of how we existed, was just in our respective spaces.
Is it fair to say that there's a loneliness for you as an 11-year-old?
I think it's fair. I think it's also maybe a bit of an understatement.
A bit of an understatement. You are a deeply lonely 11-year-old.
Yes. What perpetuated part of that loneliness? There's a loneliness in the sense that I don't have siblings to play with. There's a loneliness in the sense that I have one parent who more or less is not engaging me very much. And then that other aspect, which I know we'll probably get to in a bit, is that I'm a multiracial, multicultural person. So I am a different ethnicity than my mom,
Mm-hmm.
who's Caucasian, European, white. So there's a loneliness there in a sense too.
Yes. It is deeply complex for you. Let's just put it that way.
Yes.
Mom has her room, you have the living room. Mom's Caucasian, you are not. And at school, there is a loneliness as well, which we will get to. It comes out at the end of your story. But is it fair to say that you were in a predominantly white school?
Yes. I grew up in Colorado. I grew up right outside of Denver, or suburb of Denver. And when I was 10, we moved from Colorado to Kentucky. And we moved back to be closer to family, which in and of itself is even like a complex story, because my parents, when they got married, mom's white, dad's Afro-Indigenous, both from Western Kentucky. But when they got married, it was 3 years after the state of Kentucky had declared that interracial marriage was no longer illegal, which was actually 7 or 8 years after the Supreme Court had decided. So Kentucky had waited. They decided to get married. They moved to Colorado where it was more socially accepting. So moving from a pretty diverse area in Colorado to a white suburb of Louisville, Kentucky.
Again, the complexity, the depth of the sense of I am different, and there is a loneliness in that difference.
Yes.
And it's at home with when it's you and your mom, it's at school.
Mm-hmm.
You have a line in your story where you say, like most things I asked her, that is your mom, there wasn't much discussion. So you hadn't asked her about, hey, mom, can I shave my legs yet? But you write that you imagine when she'd say something like, let's wait until later, not right now, honey. And then you say this, it was her way of saying, I don't have the energy for that. And what struck me about that part of your story, Vanessa, is that as an 11-year-old, you can read your mom really well.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're aware of her energy depletion and saturation. Like you are aware of her energy level, what she can, how much mothering she can do today. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. And I would say even like how much adulting she could do. Because when she would get home, if she hit the bed where she was like her perch and she had TV in her room, if she hit the bed, sit down, she was done for the evening. And she also had depression, like waves of depression growing up, which I know now. I did not know, quote unquote, as an 11-year-old, but yes, I was able to read her depletion and know that she doesn't have the energy to teach me. She doesn't have the energy to engage in this like rite of passage, right? This is a rite of passage.
Right.
Um, it's devastating.
It's devastating. It leaves you alone trying to find out how to be a woman. This is a place where you need some mothering. You need to be shepherded from girl to woman.
Yeah, it's hard enough just to go from girl to woman.
And your mom is exhausted, sometimes depressed. But the bottom line for you as an 11-year-old is you're aware that you're on your own to navigate these life transitions, to learn how to be a woman.
Yeah, I'm alone in figuring this out.
What was that like for you?
I don't remember any other way. I mean, this is a story as an 11-year-old. There are stories from where, I am 6 or 9 and I'm, making my own dinner. As an adult, now when I reflect on that, what it was like for her, there is a lot of grief. There is a lot of loneliness. And I don't think I would have had words for the confusion at the time, but there were huge pockets of just dissociation trying to survive. There's the sort of existential black abyss. If I actually acknowledge that I am alone, I will not survive. So I will find a way to take care of myself.
What do you mean by dissociation? What did that look like for you, Vanessa?
For me, it looked like a lot of television. I grew up in the 80s, and so there was a lot of television. Fogginess, like just pockets of time that would pass without me knowing, like, oh, it's dark outside. It means it's time to, move toward getting ready for bed. Yeah, pockets of foggy and just loss of time.
And this is what we know about trauma. When an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old or an 18-year-old is confronted with, in this case, a level of loneliness that a nervous system can't bear, we will disconnect at some level from our felt bodily sensations. And we can do that through television. We can do that through that fogginess that you're describing. It's a nervous system disconnection from our bodies and from the sensations in our bodies. And you were familiar with that.
Yeah, there's a sense in which this story is at opposite ends of that. It almost doesn't make sense. Like, it's such an embodied story, and yet so much of this little girl's life was disconnected from body.
Yes. There's an embodiment just in the way you write the bulk of the narrative. It's such a brilliant, you write it like a novelist, right? You can see, you can hear the shaving cream, every detail you write. And then there is a shift in the story where you are no longer shaving. You are looking at your reflection in the mirror. And here's what you write, because I want to ask you about this. Instead of blue-green eyes, I have brown. All of a sudden, we're not talking about shaving anymore. This is a different part of the story. Short, dark brown curls are hidden under my towel. Curls my mom doesn't know what to do with. Chestnut brown skin takes up most of the mirror. That's what you write. What happened for you there, Vanessa, as you're looking in this foggy mirror at your eye color, which is different than the eye color of the girls at school, and your curls, which your mom doesn't know what to do with, and your chestnut brown skin, which your mom doesn't share? What happens for you there?
These are the complex layers, right? So there's a mixture of, gosh, I really want my mom here to experience this with me. And also, my mom doesn't share my eye color. I think looking in the mirror for me growing up was a realization over and over again that the person that I share a dwelling with, I am different from. And there's not conversation even about that, about hair care, about hair products, about ashy skin season when it comes and it gets dry outside. Like, that is a real occurrence for me and my skin. And I think there's this moment where it's a rite of passage that she has missed, and that it's at this threshold, it's at this precipice where I'm becoming a woman, and this is a huge step and part of that. And I want her there. And yet there is also something of her that will not be able to be present because of who she is and because of her depression, and also a part that cannot join me fully in the experience of what it is like to be in my body.
And say more about that last sentence. This is not her depression. This is
Right.
this is another piece, another layer. Can you say that last sentence again, Vanessa?
There's a realization that she does not know what it is like to be in my body, to be in my skin, to navigate the world as me with multi-cultured, multi-textured hair, with what people often describe as like racially ambiguous skin. She tells the story of people asking in the checkout line if I was adopted, asking her if I was adopted. I've grown up with people asking me, "Are you mixed? What quote, what exactly are you?" First of all, I'm human. Second of all, like there is an experience of walking through the world in my skin that my mom cannot understand.
Mhm.
And not only can she not understand it, she's not willing to acknowledge it.
The next sentence in your story is kind of back at school. And you say, without faces that look like mine, I do not know how to fit in. You're still looking in the foggy mirror,
Mhm.
but there's an awareness of all the kids at school. And you say this sentence, without faces that look like mine, I do not know how to fit in. Now, this is a very important sentence. And I think it's a sentence that most white folks don't understand very well. Can you say a little bit more about this sentence? What's it like for the 11-year-old to not only not fit in because of her dark curls and her chestnut brown skin, but at some very real level, to not have any hope of fitting in unless there's an influx of people of color into your school?
Yeah, I remember walking into my fifth grade classroom when we moved into my new fifth grade classroom. It was halfway through the school year. I think we moved midway through the year. And I was one of two people of color in my fifth grade class. And as I made my way through fifth grade and into middle school, it wasn't even necessarily like into middle school, there was a little bit more diversity in terms of folks of color. But as a multicultural person, this is a little bit more of a distinction. I didn't fit in with the white kids because I visually stood out. And I didn't fit in with the Black kids because I culturally stood out. I was culturally raised white. And so there is that sort of liminal space that is like I can actually fit in everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's absolutely maddening.
Absolutely maddening. And you are still an adolescent. You're a pre adolescent. And you are having to navigate and bear unbelievable complexity. But the felt sense for an 11-year-old who doesn't have any of this language is simply there's nowhere where I belong.
Where do I fit?
Where do I fit? Which, let's just remember, all of us adult listeners, when you're an adult, when you're in sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, that's the whole world. That's all that matters. And so, again, this is an immense loneliness, an immense sense of not belonging. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's absolutely accurate. And something else that I didn't have words for was the confusion of it. Like not having words for it contributed to confusion. So as I'm walking down the hallway, I don't understand why I don't fit in over here and I don't fit in over here. But I want to fit in over here. And you're right. Developmentally, it is about like, who are my people? Where do I fit? Where's my place?
But as you're confessing right now, it's not just loneliness, it is profound level of confusion. You can't make sense of your world.
And there's no one to help me make sense of it.
So you might not know the answer to this, but what did you do with that confusion? as an 11, 12, 13-year-old? Do you remember?
I tried to fit in primarily with white kids. I mean, the word I would use is assimilation. Almost had to cognitively disengage from the part of like the visual part of me that made me different and learn how to communicate and interact with white kids where they were and put part of myself away.
And the dilemma with that, of course, is that it puts a precious 11, 12, 13-year-old girl at war with the part of her that is not white, which is your body.
Yeah. My skin, my eyes, my hair, my lips, all of it.
Can you put any words to what that war has been like for you?
That last sentence, right? One thing I do know, I will have smooth legs like the other girls. That war didn't allow me to engage curiosity. It turned into, I think, like a disgust for, not being able to tame my hair or kind of make it do what I wanted it to do. I love my curls today. I love that I can wear it straight. I love the versatility of my hair today, but it was such a battle and such a hard fought war to come to love my hair.
So glad to hear and even see your face that you have come to bless the complexity of your being in this world. And you have come to bless at some level your body, which is different than a white body.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I imagine, took years.
Yes, it took years, and it took obviously me being willing to engage it, but it also took curiosity on behalf of others who are willing to risk stepping into even naming some of it. So I would say, even through the Allender Center, having the distinct honor and privilege of having people of color engage my story, whether or not they shared the same ethnic identity, but were able to meet me in understanding in a place of what it even means to navigate the world in a non-white body. But having a facilitator whose face actually looked like mine undid me. Like, it just undid me.
Tell me that verb. What does that verb mean for you right now? Undid me.
It's that mixture of like grief and gratitude. It's that like this like I wish you were there when I shaved my legs. I wish you were there when I was trying to figure out what to do with my hair. And I'm so glad you're here now, because those parts of me that didn't have access to her at the time can now start to come back online.
Such a brilliant articulation of undid me, the mix of grief and gratitude. And this is what happens in story work when we have a trained, wise guide that has the courage and the integrity to press into places that probably felt like do not enter signs to this person, because you have not received care here. You have not historically received presence here or even naming. And somebody took the risk of putting some language and pressing into this war that you had with your ethnicity, with your body, with your curls, with your skin, with all of it in the world that of Kentucky and of America. And it evoked in you deeper grief, which is healing, and the gratitude of, I needed you when I was 11, but I'm so glad I have your face and your voice now.
Yes.
And that's, for anyone that's done story work, those moments are nothing short of holy.
That's a great word. It is sacred ground. It's where angels fear to tread, I think.
Yes, and it is where the body of Christ, by which I mean the physical presence of Jesus in other human beings, is mediated to us, sheep who often lack a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
And you found a shepherd in this woman, this facilitator who pressed into your heart, your story. And it was a genuinely healing experience for you, is what I'm seeing on your face.
It absolutely was. It was one of those moments where when that particular group ended, that particular engagement or that particular time with that facilitator ended, I just wept uncontrollably, thinking almost like, why would you give me a little bit of that if it was only going to end? And also the gratitude. It wouldn't have meant it wouldn't have I wouldn't have felt like such a re-loss if it hadn't have impacted me so deeply to have it in the first place.
Yes. And what you're putting words to right now, I think is so important, Vanessa. It is the reality that when we get a taste of good care,
Mm-hmm.
of tenderness, of genuine kindness and courage, when we get a taste of what you experienced with this facilitator, there is a sense in which it evokes in you an awareness and a connection to how much more you need of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this story group experience is time limited, and now it's over. And that evoked sobs, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Of longing.
Of longing. Of longing and of just profound thankfulness, but also of longing. And I think longing begets longing.
But in the embrace of your longing, by which I mean your willingness to feel that ache, it created in you desire for more care, more engagement. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. And I think two things I'll say. One, it also fostered a desire for more people of color to be trained in this work. It was something that propelled me forward, even in my own training, to say, no, I now get to be that for someone else. Because I think we've made incredible strides since 2020. I think there are things that are happening in various spaces where more people of color are having access and more people have an understanding even of the cultural narrative of the country. And unfortunately, what can sometimes get lost in that is the multicultural experience, because it is distinctly different to try to navigate 2, 3, multiple worlds.
Yes.
And the second thing I would say is that I also had white facilitators who didn't shy away from engaging it too.
And just as we end, anything you'd like to say about what was that like for you?
I mean, complexity is the word. It is complex because both of those facilitators for me were white women who could very easily have not engaged it and essentially been my mother to me again. And I could have left feeling as though here is another moment when I was missed completely. But because they chose to move toward me in that way, ended up being a beautiful corrective and healing experience for me. And I'm still close with both of them to this day.
Yes. Well, that is a sweet note to end on. Vanessa, I'm deeply grateful for your courage and vulnerability, your honesty today, not just in sharing your story, but in the dialogue that we've had. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If people want to get more connected to the work you're doing, where can they go?
Sure. So I have a website. It's abidinginstory.com.
And if people want to listen to your podcast, what's it called?
Sure. So again, it's a production of the Center for Formation, Justice, and Peace, and it is called Peace Talks. We're getting ready to launch our 6th season, and I'm really looking forward to the lineup of guests that we have coming up.
Thanks so much, Vanessa.
Thank you, Adam.